Hey everybody, this is Brendan, and I got some writing advice for you. And okay, quick little thing, but just something that I have been thinking about that I would almost it's like almost more of a conversation starter than anything else, I guess. But I was just watching, well, not just one. It was a little bit of a binge. I watched several interviews on YouTube, and I love the YouTube of interviews from the animator Ralph Bakshi. And if you don't know who Ralph Bakshi is, depending on how old you are and just depending on a lot of things, probably, if you just search for Ralph Bakshi on YouTube, not just for the interviews, but also just to see little bits of his animation, the style might seem at least kind of familiar. It might just sort of seem interesting. And if you do watch that, one thing you'll sort of see is that compared to lots of sort of like major figures from the period of hand drawn animation that Ralph Bakshi sort of comes from, is that his stuff looks a lot weirder. Sometimes it looks a lot cruder. Sometimes it is kind of deliberately less perfect. And Ralph Bakshi will completely own up to that when he talks about it in the interviews. And one of the big points that Ralph Bakshi makes, which made him maybe less so now, I don't know, what people in modern animation talk about, but at least like peers of his sort of talking about the kind of animation that he does. Ralph Bakshi's point basically was that he had a point of view. He had a particular thing that he was trying to impart that was unique to him. And in order to impart that thing, he didn't think it was really that important if his craftsmanship was perfect, right? He basically thought that he was allowed to cheat, to compensate in different ways for his own lack of budget or even for his own lack of skill, it's sort of lack of craftsmanship, and to sort of muddle way through and cut corners and find a way, and that was justified because he had a real because he had an idea in his head, because he had something that he wanted to get across that he didn't think that anybody else had, and that sort of like the what was sort of more important than the how, and that the how was something that you could muddle through, and that he found that he thought that was acceptable, right? And he thought that other people should find that acceptable too, and that that's the attitude that other people should take forth creatively, and that made him kind of a controversial figure in the field of animation. And what the reason I think that it was especially controversial in animation is because you have counterexamples to Ralph Bakshi. You have Walt Disney and sort of the Walt Disney machine, especially, where there are these clear examples of just sort of perfect, gleaming craftsmanship, where everything is absolutely perfect and no expense was spared, and every like tiny little part of tiny person in this is just like a masterpiece of their own tiny field, and that this just sort of fits together into this perfect whole. And then compared to that, it's what you could see sort of an argument happening between, somebody that sort of says, okay, well, you don't need that, and then another side that says, okay, well, but if you could have that, why would you have anything else? Why would you defer to anything else? What value could somebody have if they can't get to that level of perfection? When that level of perfection does kind of exist. And it's kind of a cheap undergrad argument, because obviously there's room for both things. But just thinking about that, sort of seeing that argument happening, it just sort of, the idea that came to mind for me was that in animation, it makes sense to have that kind of argument sort of between those two extremes. I don't think that argument actually happens for writing at all, because I think no writer is Walt Disney. All writers are Ralph Bakshi, basically, where in order to, there's no one person that does everything that this sort of like hypothetical Apollonian shiny, the person that would be the writer equivalent of Disney Studios, whatever that is. That person doesn't actually exist, because nobody actually has all those things. Whereas what every writer basically is doing is that they're sort of taking what crude ideas that they have in their brain, and sort of like, and within their own unique point of view that's a little bit different than everybody else's. And then in the process of bringing that to life, maybe they have some things that they develop to get good at, but nobody's ever good at everything. So you cheat, and you have to cheat, and you should cheat, and you compensate, and you try to find a way to make your strengths be the things that are important and your weaknesses be the things that are less important. And more importantly than that, you try to pick something that you are trying to, hopefully, you should pick something that you are trying to bring about that is important enough that maybe your weaknesses don't matter. Because nobody reads a book or reads a story for its lack of mistakes, right? That never happens. What happens all the time is people, like, if you talk to somebody about their favorite writers and say, what are the weaknesses of your favorite writer? Almost anybody that's reflective at all, or widely sort of read at all, or has given any thought to this, can like tons and tons and tons of weaknesses that their favorite writer has. It's stuff that their favorite writer does badly. But that's not the point, because you don't read the writer for those things. You read the writer for the good stuff. and yeah, that's and, well, another way of thinking about it is I've heard, and again, this is I don't really know that much about animation. I know even less about about music, but I have heard it said that for on any given piano, the way that the piano is designed is that a piano is never perfectly in tune across the entirety of its keys, right? So it's never really a perfect instrument that way, the way that other instruments can be perfect in sort of a narrow range. But the nice thing about a piano is that when you're playing a piano, you can pretend to be a band, or you can pretend to be multiple different instruments sort of trading off, or you can have multiple things sort of happening at once. And basically, you can have an idea that if the idea is compelling enough, the the weaknesses of the piano as an instrument like kind of don't really matter as much, right? And I think that there are some people for different, and this argument could really spin off and go really long. But I think that there's some people that are um, try to get across the idea somehow that there is sort of like this, like the craftsmanship is although craftsmanship is important and you can learn a lot about craftsmanship, but nobody's actually good at everything, right? And people try to suggest that they are, and I think sometimes maybe even certain, the create the academic class of people that teach creative writing sometimes have like a lot invested in sort of their own idea, their own expertise, or people that are really fond of a certain period of literature or a certain kind of writer or a certain subject matter will sort of try to say like, okay, well, all those other people that are taking it were the people that really know what's going on, that sort of like really know how to do it and really have all the bases covered. Nobody actually has all the bases covered. And I think that's an important thing to think about. Oh, and then one other reason that that's sort of important to think about, I think, is that if you're talking about diversity in literature and publishing and writing and storytelling and attracting lots of different kinds of voices, which is something that, despite all the noise that is made about it, that the field as a whole is still bad at, yes, really and truly, and really needs to make a ton of progress on, yes, really and truly, is that I think if you don't understand that writers are actually Ralph Bakshi and writers are not actually Walt Disney, you might get the idea that, okay, the reason that we want, that to be having a diverse group of people participating in this thing that we're all trying to keep going, and that the reason for that is that there might be some kind of like hidden talent that needs to be tapped into, and that talent should not be sort of trapped behind the wall of a person's background or a person's point of view, and that it should be freed from that, and that they should be allowed to be initiated into this other world that where their sort of talent can be freed and allowed to blossom. And I don't think that's actually the right way of looking at it, right? Okay, because the talent and the craftsmanship part of it, that's not as important as the point of view. If you're showing up with a different point of view than most people that tend to get their books published and are trying to get that point of view across, it's not a matter of, okay, do you have the talent to then justify the fact that you have the point of view? You have the point of view. That's the important thing. That's the main thing. You're already bringing something of value. And then anything you have to do to lie, cheat, or steal in order to get that point of view across is good and valid and helpful. And yeah, that's it. Just something to think about when you're working on your own stuff. Maybe if you're acutely aware of your own weaknesses, which is something that whenever you're working on any kind of a big project, you're going to feel that way sometimes. I hope that this is a way to leaven against that. And again, if you want to argue with me, if you want to comment anything about that, if you know more about the piano or classical music or Ralph Bakshi or animation and read these things that I do and wish to correct me, that would be a lovely thing. You can subscribe, you can comment, you can do all those things. And that is it for now. Thank you so much.